Limit laws. Suppose that math c is a constant and the limit's math. The limit as x goes to a of f x, and math the limit as x goes to a of g x exist. Then 1 math the limit as x goes to a of open bracket f of x plus g of x close bracket equals the limit as x goes to a of f x plus the limit as x goes to a of g x. 2 math the limit as x goes to a of open bracket f of x minus g of x close bracket equals the limit as x goes to a of f x minus the limit as x goes to a of g x. 3 math the limit as x goes to a of open bracket c f x close bracket equals c the limit as x goes to a of f x. 4 math the limit as x goes to a of open bracket f x times g x close bracket equals the limit as x goes to a of f open paren x close paren times the limit as x goes to a of g x. 5 math the limit as x goes to a of the fraction with numerator f of x and denominator g of x equals the fraction with numerator the limit as x goes to a of f x and denominator the limit as x goes to a of g x. If math the limit as x goes to a of g x is not equal to 0,